Today we will be installing a control arm replacement kit for a 2016 Ford Fusion. This kit includes the following items: front control arms, outer tie rods, front sway bars, and rear sway bars. You will also need the following tools, including a 1/2-inch impact wrench, a 21mm, a 19mm, an 18mm, a 15mm, and a 13mm wrench, along with a 10mm, 18mm, 19mm, and 21mm socket, a 6mm Allen socket, and a small breaker bar, long 1/2-inch and 3/8 extensions, a flathead screwdriver, a 1/2-inch ratchet, an adjustable wrench, a short 1/2-inch extension, and a 1/2-inch torque wrench. Proceed to use a 19mm socket and breaker bar to loosen the lug nuts on the front wheel. Once you have done that, you can open the hood and lift the vehicle into the air, lifting the wheels off of the ground. Then use your 19mm socket and impact wrench to fully remove the lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Take your 10mm socket and impact wrench and remove the bolts holding up the engine belly pan cover, and now remove the cover. Now you can use a 15mm wrench and an 18mm socket and ratchet to remove the front lower control arm ball joint nut and bolt. Now you can take a 21mm socket and impact wrench and remove the front control arm bolt. Then take an 18mm socket and impact wrench and remove the two front control arm bushing bolts. Now you can pry down the control arm and disconnect the lower ball joint from the steering knuckle to allow you to pull out the control arm to remove it. Now use an adjustable wrench to loosen the outer tie rod and jam nuts. Then use a 21mm wrench to remove the tie rod end nut while supporting the bottom of the tie rod end with your hand. Then use a 13mm and a 19mm wrench to remove the tie rod end by using the 13mm on the inner tie rod and the 19mm on the outer tie rod, turning counterclockwise. Then take your 6mm Allen key and your 18mm wrench and remove the front stabilizer link nuts, and then proceed to fully remove the front sway bar end link. To install the tie rod, you will have to screw it on clockwise until you bottom out on the jam nut. Then proceed to put the tie rod end onto the steering knuckle and then hand thread the nut on. Then take a 21mm socket and snug up the nut so you can torque the nut to 100 Newton meters. Once you have the tie rod in the right position, tighten down the jam nut with an adjustable wrench. Now take an 18mm socket and impact and remove the upper sway bar end link sensor and bracket. Proceed to reinstall the sway bar link and sensor bracket, followed by the nut and tightening it with an 18mm socket and impact, so that way you can take your 18mm socket and torque the sway bar link to 80 Newton meters. Now we can install the front control arm and take the 21mm bolt and hand thread it in, so you can hand thread in one of the 18mm bolts while using a screwdriver to align the holes to help install. With an 18mm, tighten the two control arm bushings and then proceed to torque them to 120 Newton meters. Then take a 21mm socket and tighten the front control arm bolt and then proceed to torque that to 140 Newton meters. Now you can insert the front control arm's lower ball joint into the bottom of the steering knuckle, and then take your 15mm bolt and insert it into the knuckle, followed by the 18mm nut. Now you can take your 15mm wrench and 18mm socket and tighten the nut till it's tight. Insert the lower part of the sway bar end link into the sway bar and tighten the nut with an 18mm wrench and a 6mm Allen key, and then proceed to torque it to 80 Newton meters. Now take your 10mm socket and reinstall the engine belly pan cover, installing all the 10mm bolts surrounding the shield. You can reinstall your front wheels by hand tightening the lug nuts to prevent cross-threading. And then you can take a 19mm socket and impact wrench to tighten down the lug nuts. Then use the 19mm socket on a torque wrench so you can torque the lug nuts to 120 Newton meters in a star pattern. Use a 19mm socket to remove the lug nuts off of the rear wheel, and then proceed to remove the rear wheel so you can gain access, so you can take your 18mm socket and impact to remove the lower and upper rear sway bar end link bolts. Then remove the sway bar so you can install the new sway bar end link, followed by the nuts. Now tighten them with the 18mm socket and impact. Once they are tight, use an 18mm socket and torque wrench and torque both of the nuts to 80 Newton meters. Now you can install the rear wheel also by hand threading the lug nuts so you can tighten them with your 19mm socket and impact wrench. Now with your 19mm socket and torque wrench, torque the rear wheel lug nuts to 120 Newton meters in a star pattern.